Good evening. I'm attorney Lawrence Berliner. I'm an attorney in the field of special education law, and with me is our co-host Jane Faherty, who is the director of the Stamford Jewish Community Center JumpStart program and also a self-styled advocate. We have a returning champion, a very special guest who will introduce herself. It's Jennifer Weitz. Okay, and I apologize. And she is an advocate for JW Advocates LLC, and she'll discuss her qualifications. It's hard to believe that Jane and I have been still doing this for the past 2+ years and going to our 3rd year of doing these typically monthly webinars on issues affecting parents and their children in the field of special education. We're part of a community of concerned parents and professionals. We're all still learning the second going to 3rd year of dealing with this pandemic on how to educate children with special needs or disabilities. The 3 of us are Connecticut-based advocates and attorneys, and I know we have guests from around the country and several cases possibly from other countries, but all of our information is Connecticut-based. That's where I'm licensed to practice, and that's where Jennifer and Jane's advocacy is focused. We have gathered again tonight to address questions and frustrations and try to share some success and answer questions. We have several topics to cover. We also have quite a few questions that came in. We'll try to get to everybody's question as best we can in the time allotted. I do have one disclaimer before we start. This webinar is being recorded. The information provided during this webinar does not constitute specific legal advice to you or your child's circumstances and should not be relied upon as such. The webinar does not establish an attorney-client relationship with attorney Lawrence Berliner, myself, JW Advocates LLC, the Stamford Jewish Community Center, the JumpStart program. By signing up, you've agreed to receive information about future webinars and events from the Stamford Jewish Community Center and the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner. Please note this is a Zoom meeting format, and it is being recorded. Zoom is a third-party provider and not an agent of or associated with the Stamford Jewish Community Center, JW Advocates LLC, the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner, LLC. We appreciate your questions, and if there are questions that do come in during this evening's webinar, we would very much appreciate it if you use the Q&A section at the bottom of your computer screen. As I mentioned before, this is being recorded, and anything that's in the chat section on the right-hand side of the computer screen is being recorded, but the Q&A is not. So to maintain privacy as best we can, we urge you to use Q&A. In the chat section, you'll see there's a lot of contact information for Jennifer, Jane, and myself. There are links to the State Department of Education website. There are links to the United States Department of Education website because some of our topics tonight will cover links or publications that are linked to those websites. So without further ado, let me turn this over to Jane, and then we'll let Jennifer introduce herself, and we will go from there.
Thanks, Lawrence. It's lovely to be back again. I can't believe we've been doing this for more than 2 years. The time has flown. It's a busy time of year with PPT meetings, reviewing the previous year of school and looking forward to the next year, making sure that all the right related services and IEPs are in accordance for the start of the next school year. I do oversee the JumpStart program based in the Stamford JCC, and we are opening up a second JumpStart classroom in Norwalk in the fall, which is exciting. So at JumpStart, we primarily support children with developmental disabilities aged between 2 and 3 years of age. So I collaborate very much with Birth to Suite 3 services. I then support those children through into the school district transition. And as I've been doing this for 8 years now, I am also familiar and support children throughout elementary school, and I also have some in middle school as well. In addition to JumpStart, we also have a program called Hand in Hand, which is a summer camp where we can provide enhanced support for those students that may need it through to 9th grade. So just looking forward to being here this evening and sharing with everybody. It's been a bit of a silly season. Lots of support is needed for our families and their children. So it's lovely to have Jennifer here tonight to share this conversation with us. We've had lots of questions that have come in ahead of tonight, and we're looking forward to answering those that happen as we have this conversation going forward. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm Jennifer Weitz. I am the owner of JW Advocates. We're located in Southbury, Connecticut, but we are special education advocates who serve all of Connecticut. I actually started my career as a corporate attorney in Manhattan, which is totally different than what I do now. I have 2 children with special needs, and as I was spending all of my time raising them and learning all of the ins and outs of special needs laws and education, I decided to change my focus. And when we ended up in Connecticut, I became a special education advocate. And I'm happy to be here and talk about all that I've learned with my own children, and hope that some of the advice we pass out here can help all of you.
Thank you. Well, this evening, we're going to briefly return to one prior topic. We had Brian Klimowitz several weeks ago discuss the new IEP that will be taking effect on July 1st and every annual review on or after July 1st, extended school year services, annual review PPT meetings, and planning for next year, and a few other topics that will come in based upon our questions that we have received. In the chat section, Brian had promised a side-by-side comparison between the old IEP and the new one, and we have posted a link to that publication in the chat section, so you can see the publication comparison of old and new IEP. I think it's towards the top of the chat. And that way, as we move forward with the school year, parents can become more familiar, and for that matter, anybody else working with parents and children with disabilities, with how the format is changing. Some of it is making it easier to read the IEP, and some of it is still very much a work in process. One of the exciting new changes, and I haven't seen it because the website or portal hasn't been rolled out yet, is there will be a parent portal to access the IEP, the records, anything that is placed in the portal by the school district and the State Department of Education. The State Department of Education will only be putting their documentation in the portal, but the school district can put report cards, evaluation reports, correspondence back and forth. So until we start seeing it in action, it sounds like it's an exciting step forward, because the last time we looked at this IEP document was back in 2006, and we're now going into a brand new era with this electronic IEP. And my favorite part is they're increasing the font size to at least 10-point font, because my eyes cannot deal with this 1-point font anymore. I don't know, Jane or Jennifer have had any experience with the new IEP or discussing it?
No, I haven't had any experience with it yet. And a lot of the families that I'm working with are not even asking questions about it. I think that they haven't really heard much about it. I don't know how much districts have openly been sharing that at this point, or whether families are just too busy trying to read the current IEPs that they have and decipher those rather than looking ahead at what the new ones might look like. And they're too focused on the content of the existing ones. But luckily we have these webinar sessions. So as they start to roll out, I'm sure that we might be doing another webinar, Lawrence, in the fall, answering more questions with regard to the new format. But as of this moment, I haven't had too many people talking about it, other than administrators and teachers have been saying they're unsure as to how much time it might take them to fill out that information while they're still unfamiliar with it. But other than that, no great conversations. How about you, Jennifer?
Well, that's exactly the case that I've seen as well. Many parents, I believe, are unaware of the fact that the IEP is going to be changing, but the Bureau of Special Education's site has done a really nice job putting a copy of the actual new IEP, sort of a template, on the site, as well as this new side-by-side document, which I just looked at a day or two ago, and the side-by-side really pinpoints in notes underneath exactly where they've made the changes and where things basically have stayed the same. So it will make things a lot easier for those of us who are very familiar with the current IEP to realize, okay, this is the same, and these pages, a few pages down, are totally different, and this is no longer, for example, prior written notice is no longer part of the IEP document. So that's a very big difference. And, you know, I'm sort of on the fence about whether that's going to be a good or a bad thing. It's always difficult to have to look for another document from a school system. It's sometimes hard enough to get just the IEP document in the time frame that you're supposed to be getting it. But it will also call more attention to the prior written notice. And, you know, as it has to be a separate document, perhaps more time will be spent filling it out, and it'll be a little bit more specific than it sometimes is currently.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the thing at the moment that a lot of my families have been talking about is ESY, which actually relates to one of the questions we had before the webinar aired. And what's interesting is some parents don't understand the acronym. So ESY is extended school year. So the question that we received is, and I'm going to assume it's written from the perspective of considering extended school year and ESY. Does a parent need to request a summer program for their child, or does the school recommend for the child to participate in one? So this is both to you, Lawrence, and to you, Jennifer.
Yes. Well, so ESY, sorry.
I said, go first, please.
Oh, okay. ESY is something that is typically brought up at the annual PPT. It's usually part of the information that they review after they talk about progress and new goals and objectives. One of the last things that will probably come up is ESY. As you know, was mentioned, ESY is extended school year. It doesn't only have to be for the summer. It could mean an extended school day, but typically it refers to the summer program. And Connecticut has both regression and recruitment criteria for ESY, which means that if there's evidence in the past that your child has regressed from the end of the school year to the beginning of the school year, you can build a nice case that they would be entitled to ESY based on regression. But there are other factors that come into play, and many school districts simply focus on the regression factor, but there are also things that are non-regression, such as the nature or severity of the child's disability, whether the student's likely to lose critical skills and or fail to recover the skills within a reasonable period of time as compared to other students, and that's the regression recruitment. The student's progress in the area of learning, crucial to attaining self-sufficiency and independence from caretakers. That's not one we hear that frequently, but it is there, and it's something that I think everybody should be aware of, especially if you have a a particularly involved child. The student's stereotypic and ritualistic, aggressive, or self-injurious interfering behaviors prevent the student from receiving some educational benefit from the program during the school year. And that's another one that doesn't come up very frequently, but could be very important in receiving ESY. And then there's just other special circumstances that are identified by the IEP team, such as the student's ability to interact with other non-disabled students, the areas of the student's curriculum that need continuous attention, and the student's vocational needs and availability of other resources. So if you go to an IEP, PPT, and the team says, well, they have not shown any regression, you should always make sure that they understand that you understand that there are other factors that can also come into play. That's pretty much the summary of what ESY is. And I'm going to turn it over now to Lawrence. I know that you have some more information on summer camps and other programs, and a little bit of more information that you wanted to share.
Yes, we have a couple of comments on the chat. ed.gov is the U.S. Department of Education's website, and ct.gov is the State Department of Education website, and you want to link to the Bureau of Special Education for topic briefs on ESY, the side-by-side comparison that we had mentioned. It's towards the top of the chat for those who have arrived late. And as far as what Jennifer said, I only have to add to it because it's completely accurate. There are multiple factors, and it also requires out-of-box thinking, because the number 4 is what I typically hear for ESY. 4 hours a day, 4 days a week, and sometimes we need, especially with schools getting out, say the middle of June, and you go out to the middle of July. What happens to the end of July and August? Will the student regress? And parents are a very important source of that regression data, because you see your child outside of school. When you have a long school vacation, how is your child doing the Monday after he or she returns to school? And how long does it take for them to reacclimate to school? Summer vacations, in the past, the same thing. How long does it take your child to reacclimate to school come September? Because some students, the first day of school is the first day of school. And for other children who have regressed and are spending an inordinate amount of time recouping those lost skills, their first day of school might be the middle of October, because it takes so much time to recoup those lost skills. I would also add the free appropriate public education standard that applies to the regular school year equally applies to the ESY summer programming. I hear school districts often say, we only have to provide maintenance services. We are not allowed to let the student make any progress. I've never seen that in the law. I maintain my house, I maintain my car, but I don't maintain a child. And often over the summer, if we're not dealing with multiple demands on the child, for example, it might give a child an opportunity for social pragmatics. So we don't have to work on academic skills, we're working on social skill opportunities. For an older student, maybe an internship or a summer job might help with the transition plan that Jennifer mentioned a few moments ago. So the summer is a time to be creative, have out-of-box thinking. For ESY, I've also had it happens rarely, but it does happen, to use parks and recs or some summer recreation programs for ESY. So it doesn't have to be sitting in an unair-conditioned classroom on a hot summer day, being bored. You can find something exciting to do, whether it's a transition plan, part of a transition plan for an older student, working on social skills at a camp, Parks and Rec program, or possibly getting an internship at a Parks and Rec or a job and having the supports one needs. So there are topic briefs on the State Department of Education website, ct.gov, the Bureau of Special Education, and I urge our audience who are interested in that information to use the State Department of Education website.
I'd just like to mention as well that if you're new to ESY, you can't assume that the same team are going to be working with your child over the summer months. Quite often, there are different clinicians, different providers, different occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech pathologists. You might even have a different one-to-one. So just be aware that there might be a transition, and also the ESY program might take place in a different school building within your district. So if you have a child that struggles with transitions and you know ahead of time that the practitioners and the teachers and educators that are going to be working with your child will be different, request a social story so you can start that conversation and that gentle introduction ahead of time so that they're not surprised that it's not the familiar faces that they're used to. And if you have a chance to take them to that location ahead of time to help them become familiar with orientating around the building, particularly if it is a much larger space than they're typically used to, that might also be helpful as well. Because sometimes the transition into ESY can be unsettling, as is then the transition to leave ESY and to return back to the typical school day routine, as well as classmates and educators and support personnel that they're familiar with. So just have that conversation and don't be shy to ask if it would be the same team that your child would be spending time with, and is it the same students in the group that they'll be socializing and spending time with too. So just so you can prep and plan ahead, particularly for those students that transitions are a challenge for them.
Excellent point. And one question that came in through the chat was, what happens if you refuse ESY? What are the repercussions? In my experience, I don't know what yours are, Jennifer and Jane, is the schools say, in the fall, we offered you ESY, so don't complain that your child is behind the 8 ball. So I don't know if you've had different experiences, but that's what I've experienced with my clients.
No, I've had the same, but I do every year have a number of families that turn down the ESY, and typically their reason or rationale for doing it is because they want, in the ESY programs their children would typically be enrolled in, it's a more restrictive environment compared to some camp options, which might have additional support services embedded within it. So normally that's explained as a rationale and reason why, or if a child is space sensory seeking, might benefit from more pool time or outside play or water or interactions like that. So normally when the parents have turned down the ESY, they've quantified it and qualified it with rationale and reasons why, rather than just saying, no, we're not interested. They've explained it to the district, the reason why they're making this decision at this time, and making it clear it's not necessarily going to be the same decision the following year.
Yes, I think that's a very important point to bring up, that you should make it clear that you do still want it offered the next year, because the refusal one year might not be for the same reason that would make sense the following year. But oftentimes parents refuse ESY because they don't understand that it can be something that is tailor-made for their child. So the district will say, what we offer is, as Lauren said before, 4 days a week, 4 hours a day, math, reading, writing, social skills, whatever it might be. And then we have a fun Thursday, whatever it is. But it still holds true that the ESY program has to be appropriate for your child. So if your child is behind in reading and nothing else, has appropriate social skills, social emotional behaviors are all intact and where they're supposed to be, doesn't have any type of math deficit, just has a reading deficit, then ask for tutoring for 2 hours a day. It doesn't have to be the 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. Another thing, as we were talking, I was recalling a PPT that I just had, and I think it's important to point out that you really, really need to know your numbers and your data, because I had a PPT with a young man who ended third grade at a kindergarten reading level, but ended third grade at a second grade reading level. And when he started fourth grade, he was at a kindergarten reading level. Okay, he regressed that much. And by the end of fourth grade, he was at a second grade level. And the conversation during that PPT was from all the staff, look at that. He grew 2 grade levels. It's enormous growth. It's so impressive. But had I not known that he ended the year before at that very same grade that he just ended this year at, I wouldn't be able to say, okay, well, he regressed tremendously over the summer. We need intensive ESY right now. And we don't want to just maintain his skills. We want him to move forward, and we want him to keep, moving on in this multi-sensory reading program. So I think it's critical when you're looking at anything in an IEP, but in particular when you're trying to prove that regression piece for ESY as one of the factors, that you really, really look through your notes, through teacher conferences and past present levels and IEPs, and really see where the data lies, and use that to your advantage if you can.
Sorry, just to clarify, a PPT is the same as an IEP meeting in different states. It's an opportunity where the team, the educational team and the parents come together to review and discuss the individual educational plan. So it might be called an IEP meeting in some states, but in Connecticut, we call it a PPT meeting.
And for those from New York, they call it a CSE meeting. So Committee on Special Education, if I have the acronym. We also just got a question germane to ESY, and if it's not mentioned in the annual review IEP meeting or PPT meeting, is it too late to request it? And the answer is no. I mean, if it wasn't brought up, there's nothing preventing you as a parent from being proactive and making a request. I'm concerned with my child regressing over the summer. Is there something that you, the school district, could recommend? Because when we have long weekends and when we have long school holidays or summer vacations, or for those who are still having the COVID-19 school closures in the forefront of their memories, what happened when our children were not in school during that period of time. And that's why I say parents are an excellent source of data on regression, especially over holidays and especially over the summer.
Talking about tutoring, which you touched upon, Jennifer, and also data, Lawrence, which you're mentioning now too, there was a question that was submitted ahead of time. Would they be able to get help to get your child evaluated and place them in special education setting if necessary with tutoring support? So Lawrence and Jennifer, what are your suggestions in terms of what type of data do you think needs to be collected, and how should that data be presented in order to show that your child needs additional support and services, whether it's during the school year or during the ESY year, in this regard, tutoring?
Well, I always consider parents a reliable source of information. They have wisdom, intuition, and experience, and they see their child in multiple settings, not just school. So I always advise my clients, go with that little voice in the back of your head, go with the feeling in the pit of your stomach and act on it to get school district evaluations or your own evaluations. As far as the financial support, children are entitled to what's called a free appropriate public education. That's the acronym FAPE. So if it's a school district resource, such as an evaluation, it should be without direct cost to a parent. It should be in the school budget. I mean, nothing is free, but it's called a free appropriate public education. The problem is where parents are going, if they want a private evaluation, how do they get a private evaluation? And that dovetails with one of the questions that we had this evening and one that came in during the webinar about independent educational evaluations. Parents can ask a school district for an IEE, an independent educational evaluation, if they disagree with the school district evaluation. The school district has two choices. They can say yes, which means they'll pay for the evaluation if the evaluator meets their criteria. And if they say no, they have to take you to a due process hearing to defend their evaluation. Our state Department of Education in March of 2018 had published an extensive guidance policy letter on independent evaluations here in Connecticut. ct.gov. It's called Guidelines Regarding Independent Evaluations at Public Expense and In-School Observations. And it's a very extensive publication on parental rights and how to work in the spirit of collaboration to get that outside evaluation. What I tell my clients is nothing wrong with your knowledge or instinct or your experiences when that is validated by somebody with with a PhD in psychology, or they're a licensed speech and language pathologist or physical therapist or occupational therapist or educator. When your concerns are validated by an outside professional, that's the type of information you want to bring to a school district informally ahead of a PPT meeting and formally at a PPT meeting to see how we can possibly move forward. The problem with the financial piece is the demand for funding, outside or private funding, exceeds the supply of funds that are available. I have posted in the chat section, because some of my clients have Husky D insurance, the University of Connecticut Center on Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, that's the link on the chat, has several what they call autism diagnostic centers in Connecticut that will accept insurance, Husky, low-cost partial payments. And in addition to autism, some of these centers will do evaluations of children with other disabilities or conditions. So trying to get your child properly evaluated by a school district and outside the school district is critically important.
Just to add to that, as a caveat, when you do get an independent evaluation, which is always very, very useful to have, the school district is only required to consider it. They do not have to comply with all the recommendations. It's still a very, very good tool to have, especially when they find evidence and data for the issues that you may be seeing with your own child. A lot of school districts, in addition, will decline or deny the request for an IEE, the independent evaluation, if you don't, and you're not required to, but if you don't really explain in detail why it is that you disagree with their evaluation. So although you're not required to, I would strongly recommend really going through that evaluation, especially with somebody who's familiar with the tests, to make sure that it was comprehensive, and to make sure that there aren't discrepancies throughout, and to really make the district understand why it is that you disagree with it.
The value of having an IEE2, even if the district disagree with the content, it provides you as a parent with a baseline from which you can then track and use as an independent benchmark from which you can then gauge, are they making progress from that snapshot, a moment in time going forward? So even if the school district do not agree with the content, or even agree to acknowledge some of the methodology that might be suggested to help support your child, that doesn't mean it's not valuable information that you can then use to track your child's progress from that date forward, using the school district's information and reports and progress reports that they provide you with subsequently to track that progress, or or, you know, or decide whether it is progress or not. So it's really valuable benchmark information that you should always have a baseline from which to know where your child is currently performing, so you can gauge the trajectory that they're going in.
And that sort of dovetails with one of our topics for tonight. You know, here we are approaching the end of the school year, and parents should have a fairly good idea, looking backwards to the beginning of the school year, where their child was starting, what the gaps were, what the needs were, and how those gaps and those needs are being addressed. Because by the end of the school year, you should be able to see measured, meaningful progress. So if a child is 2 years behind grade level, say in reading, maybe by the end of the year, they're 1 year behind. If they have a learning disability, there'll always be a gap, but you're seeing that gap close. If they have social and emotional issues and they're more compliant today than they were in September, that's another way to measure progress. So there are all kinds of measures of progress, but where the independent evaluation comes into play is sometimes we just can't agree. We're talking about two different versions of the child, the parent's version and the school. So you bring in effect, a neutral who is qualified, capable, has no vested interest in the outcome of the evaluation, and will, you know, make recommendations based upon observations, standardized testing. And one of our questions that came in tonight is, how do you find a therapeutic school for a child with autism or ADD? There's two answers to that question. Our state and other states have a list of approved private special ed schools. In Connecticut, ct.gov, there's a list of approved private special ed schools. And the other answer is either having school district or private evaluative data to support an out-of-district placement. And that's where the free appropriate public education comes into play. That's the legal standard. So if your child is being denied a free appropriate public education, and you've tried to work with the school district to effectively fix the problem, the disagreement, then sometimes parents feel they have no choice but to explore other alternatives. And in Connecticut, we have about 80 or so approved private special ed schools. We have about a dozen or so that are special ed schools that are not on that list. And New York, Massachusetts, and a few other states have their own list. I don't know if every state has a list, but I know New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, I think Rhode Island have such a list.
It's just important as a parent, when you are deciding an out-of-district placement, to take the time to do your own research, and also to go and visit the school if possible. You'll get a lot of information by actually seeing and feeling it. And whilst, you know, the curriculum and the methodologies might look similar, you'll know which environment is going to be the right fit for your child. But it is often a very private and personal decision, and not necessarily one that can, you can't necessarily compare that it'll be the right school for your child just because it's a good fit for somebody else's child that you might know. You really do need to take the time to find out the right fit for your child by visiting where possible, and going to do your own research on the school, because parents will have different opinions and different experiences in different schools, even if it's out of district placement. Not everybody's going to be satisfied, so you need to do your own research on that, would be my recommendation. Jennifer, do you have any other suggestions or comments on that?
Yes, so oftentimes the school will provide you with a list of schools that they are going to refer your child to, meaning that they'll send your child's records to those specific schools. But while it's definitely prudent to look at those schools, I would suggest never limiting your search only to the schools that the school has suggested. There might be another school out there that you could go visit, like Jane said, that really fits you know, your child's needs and that you feel would be appropriate for your student that the district just hasn't thought of at that time. In addition, as Lawrence mentioned, there are some schools that are not on that CT approved special education list, and some of them are very good schools. They generally will not be schools that the district is going to recommend to you right off the bat, but they may in fact be the most appropriate school for your child. So you don't want to just discredit them based on the fact that they're not on the list or that the school district didn't suggest them as an appropriate placement. So a lot of research goes into it. And there are also a lot of websites, Facebook sites that that are for networking for parents of students with special needs. And on that, you'll find, parents with a lot of differing opinions on different outplacements, but at the very least, you could get an opinion or perhaps privately chat with another parent who has had experiences at the schools that you might be looking at. And I often find that to be useful.
We had a question that also came in about a list of advocates or legal aid lawyers. The State Department of Education, ct.gov, has such a list of low and no cost advocates and or attorneys. I don't know if it's just attorneys and advocates or just attorneys, but they do have such a list available for the person that's seeking that list. And then there's another question that came in. I appreciate both of your comments. How long do you wait before you decide that an IEP is not effective?
I just wanted to add quickly, just in terms of other resources, there's an organization called COPA, the Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys. That's also a good resource that you can join as a parent, and that can help you network with other parents in the local area, and also become familiar with maybe some other advocacy groups, as well as individuals or attorneys too. So COPA is also another good resource to connect with as a parent, to try and find resources within your local community. So that's COPA, C-O-P-A-A, the Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys.
Excellent resource. I commend it highly. I was just referring what the State Department of Education had to do, but COPA is an excellent resource, and there's a lot of networking, as Jane pointed out. So moving on, how long does a parent wait before they act on their concerns that an IEP is not meeting their child's needs? Any thoughts?
So I think that it depends on what the goal is that you're looking at and how it's written. So if it was a short-term goal that by such and such date, your child should have mastered the goal. So if the IEP, for example, was written in September and it says by December, they should have mastered step 1 in the Wilson program, something like that. And they're nowhere near completing the first step of the Wilson program, then you know you have a problem by then. But typically the districts don't make it that easy for us, and they don't, that's something that we do. We come back in and we look at the goals and we try to make them very measurable. We do try to put dates by which certain steps should be completed. But if you don't have that currently in your IEP, it's very difficult to know by when, because it's by the end of the school year. And I see very often satisfactory progress. June comes along, mastered. So the best way to do it is to ask for data, to have team meetings. I suggest team meetings every 4 to 6 weeks. If your student is in a multi-sensory reading program, I suggest that you get bi-weekly data on the reading program to make sure that they are progressing at a rate that the program recommends, or the typical rate that the program sees progression. But it's a good question, and it really, really does depend on the goal, and the goal has to be written properly to begin with in order to know whether a student is making those short-term steps of progress to be able to master it at the very end.
I think it also go by your intuition. I think as parents, we have a sense sometimes before it becomes truly apparent to us that there might be something slightly amiss with our child and how they are feeling about their school, and that quite often that might relate to how they're performing in school. You can get a sense by how is it going when they're doing homework at home? Are they avoiding it? Are they taking too long doing their homework, more than you would typically expect? Pay attention to some of the information that the child is showing or displaying with their behavior, because that might alert you to some issues that need to be addressed sooner than later. So you can nip something in the bud before it manifests and really becomes an issue in terms of their performance or ability to master or meet a goal. So really pay attention to that, and ask questions, and regular frequent communication with the team and the teachers will also help you be informed before something grows beyond a state that's more difficult to address. So that would be some of the advice that I would give too. But quite often, if you have an inkling that something isn't quite right and you have a concern, don't sit on it, just start asking questions and create that open channel of communication with the team as soon as you can.
And that last comment, to expand upon, was one of the questions we received, and this is in the context of occupational therapy, but it can apply to any other part of a child's education. If you're seeing things at home that are impacting education, and this parent is talking about tying shoelaces, for example, maybe there are problems buttoning a coat, or maybe there's a problem with other graphomotor skills like handwriting, computer, keyboarding. If this is having an educational impact, you start this conversation with the teacher, the school administrators, and if necessary, arrange for a school district evaluation or your own evaluation if you're able to obtain one. As I said before, we can't be looking at two different versions of the same child. The one who doesn't have any needs and is progressing, and the one who has all these needs and is not progressing. We want to make sure the child is making meaningful educational progress, that the gaps that have been identified, well, first, the gaps have been properly identified, and those that have been identified are starting to close over time. So you can say at the end of the school year, looking backwards, yes, well, the gaps haven't closed completely, but I have been able to see measurable and meaningful progress in coming to the close of the school year.
I think that is really, really important to sort of define what is measurable and meaningful progress. I was just at a PPT where the student went from the 1st to the 5th percentile, and the team thought that that was tremendous progress. That is not meaningful progress. This child is still in the 5th percentile. So what does it mean to be meaningful? Meaningful gets you, gets you a little bit farther than a couple of percentage points. So it's important to really look at that and, really ask questions of the team when they're saying, we saw a lot of growth. Your child made growth. Your child did phenomenally well. They made so much growth this year. Show me, where is the growth? Show me the data, look at the numbers and decide. And, hopefully the team is accurate and that they can provide you with the data showing that there was tremendous growth. But oftentimes that data looks a little bit different to a parent than it does to the school team. And you probably wouldn't think that 1st to 5th percentile was great growth for your child in an entire school year.
And I met, in terms of goals, I just met a family, I looked at the IEP, their child had significant needs. And one of the goals, the parents were very pleased to show me, look, they're working on a goal for greeting an adult and greeting a peer. And I said, have you noticed the goal states they only need to do that once a week? The parent was horrified. They hadn't paid attention to the detail. They assumed that goal would be, throughout the day, and it was once a week. So when they sat back and thought about that, they only want my child to greet somebody once a week as a goal. So pay attention to the detail and make sure the goals you can quantify them and qualify them, but also find out who's taking that data. Who is the one that is taking that data and working with my child to help them master these goals as well. Don't just assume it's going to be a teacher or assume it's going to be an OT or a PT. It might be an OTA. It could be the paraprofessional. So just pay attention to that detail with the goals as well.
And the devil is in the details, as was pointed out, and you have to look at the IEP language, the goals, and the other part of the IEP and make sure you understand it. And if you don't understand it, the school team is supposed to explain it to you. Jane's example reminded me of PPT I had last year where the goal was to greet somebody. And the student said hello, but he never waited for the response, but that was mastery of the skill. I said, we're not there just to say hello. We're supposed to use that as a lead into a conversation. Hi, how are you? Oh, I have the same sweater at home. What did you do over the weekend? But the school just looked at it. They said a greeting, and that was progress. So we have to look at this in a practical, pragmatic way, a real common sense way of what we're trying to do, and that is to teach our next generation the skills they need so they can take their rightful place in society when they either graduate from high school or age out of special education at age 22, whichever happens first. And that's where transition planning for the older student, which in Connecticut starts at age 14, not 15. That law was changed a little while ago. And making sure that we have our elementary school, our preschool children prepared for elementary school, our elementary school properly prepared for middle school, and our middle school students prepared for high school, and our high school students prepared for life after high school. That's what this is about for a child with an IEP, and it's certainly this is what we expect for a child without an IEP. We want them to be successful, independent, have marketable skills to a college, an employer, go off and conquer the world with a skill set that will lead you there.
Just quickly to follow on from that, the other in terms of the devil in the detail, look at the percentage that they claimed would equal mastery. So on some IEPs, I've seen IEPs where if a child masters a goal and is considered 70% of the time, it's considered mastered. I always had the expectation that regardless of the developmental level and abilities of a child, all children should be striving to be A students, and to accept a 70% on a simplistic goal, to me is not mastery, and teachers wouldn't accept that 70% of another child looking at other goals. So why do they think it's reasonable to accept that, for example, 70% or 80% of mastery because it's on an IEP, when in reality, they wouldn't accept that for another student. So challenge those, even if you agree with the goal, pay attention to the percentage that would then be considered mastery as well. And it might not be the same percentage for every goal you have, but do pay attention to that information too.
Yeah, just to add on to that as well, the other piece to look at is the evaluation procedure. And I always want to make sure that that includes data collection. And the worst thing is to come to the table and have the teacher say, it just says, all he had to do was complete the work. I didn't have to take data on it, so I have nothing to show you. Really, they should be taking data for every area. But unless it says data collection, oftentimes you're not going to see any data, and it's important to put it in there.
Well, my favor is just they put down teacher observation. Well,
right. Right, that's it.
How do you get the data if it's the teacher's right. observing it? So there are multiple measures, including parent data, standardized tests, progress monitoring, work samples, whatever shows the child is making meaningful progress, words of the United States Supreme Court, or they're not making that meaningful progress. I always tell my clients, aim high, maybe we'll achieve those goals. Aim low, we'll definitely achieve those. We want to make sure we aim high to make sure we give our children the best possible opportunity to achieve their goals, their dreams in life, as we are preparing them, as I said, for eventually the young adulthood. We talked a little bit about how to end the school year. Any thoughts about how to begin the next school year?
Well, depending on your child, but in particular with a child with anxiety, or anybody who might have trouble for whatever reason transitioning or self-advocating. I mean, I've done this for my own children all the way through high school. I always like to suggest that a parent or the student themselves create a student profile that just explains a little bit about the student, their age, their family members, some of their hobbies, some of their likes, their dislikes, their strengths, their weaknesses, if they're behavioral, what some of the triggers might be, a one-page sheet that can be disseminated to everybody who's going to be working with that child. So to have that ready for or before, preferably the first day of school, so that that can be distributed to everyone, including the bus driver, anybody who's going to be coming into contact with that child. I found that staff and team members have greatly appreciated having that information, not only about my own children, but I always have my clients do that as well. And another thing is to make sure in the IEP that you put in for team meeting at the very least, and potentially a PPT close to the start of the beginning of the school year, because you want to make sure that what you put in place at the end of one year is still applicable at the beginning of the next.
And also, if anything does change over the ESY, which it might, you might discover or acquire new information or data. Don't hesitate to share that at the very beginning of the school year, because it might make a difference to how the school year begins. So transmit anything that happens over ESY as well, because as I said, it might be a different team working with your child during ESY versus the beginning of the school year. Don't assume that the two teams are going to connect and relay and share information. You need to control that information and make sure that you share it. Don't depend upon them to do that.
And that's an excellent point, because what I advise my clients, the only thing you can assume is you can't assume. Because when you start assuming that, that's when you sort of get hit in the back of the head when you're not, watching. And you want to see the data. You want to celebrate your child's success. You want to read along with the progress that's being reported. You want to share concerns if you're not seeing this at home, because home and school and home are interconnected. Whatever happens at home is probably going to affect the school day, and whatever happens at school is probably going to affect home. I've had many clients, their child is perfectly well behaved and holds it together during the school day, and comes home and has a major meltdown. Well, my educated guess, it's not the bus ride home that caused the meltdown. Occasionally that is the case, but it's what happened during the school day. They go home, it's warm, it's fuzzy, unconditional love, and they just unload on the parents, and the parents are supposed to pick up the pieces and figure out what happened during the school day when they weren't there. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to be part of the team, and it's a team effort. That's why it's called, in Connecticut, we call it a PPT. Letter T is a team, and parents are an equal member of the team. And so if you're seeing things at home that are affecting your child's education, and that sort of dovetails with one of the questions we just received a few moments ago, are there mitigating factors in determining eligibility? I'm not aware of any. There are 14 categories of eligibility here in Connecticut. And what we look at is whether a child has a disability. Those are the 14 factors. Is there an adverse impact upon their education? And can they benefit from the specialized instruction, which is the IEP? So if you as a parent have that kind of information at home, outside of school, child's not generalizing skills. They may do math perfectly well in school, but you go into a restaurant or a store, it's not generalized. They're supposed to know time, money at a young age, but they don't generalize the skill, or they can't read a menu, or they can't read a sign out in the community. This is the kind of data that parents bring to a PPT meeting in Connecticut, or the CSE meetings in New York, or the IEP meetings, wherever they are happening. So parents need to be their best advocate for their child, going backwards, going forward, You have the data, you see your child in multiple settings, as I said before, not just one.
Also, don't be shy. If your child is receiving private support, whether it's OT, PT, speech or behavior, and you're seeing success in those sessions, sign the release for those practitioners to share that information with the school team. I've done a lot of collaborative work with those partnerships, and some of the practitioners in the district have very much welcomed the expertise and information from other professionals, and it has helped blend the two experiences. So don't be shy and don't hold back sharing what they might be doing with a private practitioner. Share that with the district. And again, consistency and continuity is key, as are using the same strategies. Because your private practitioner might have different skills and insight. They might have used different methodology that could be helpful. And I've been in situations where the district then like, oh, we didn't realize that they were using the LAMP software and that they're proficient. We're going to switch. We just didn't realize that's what they were using outside of school. So don't be shy. Information is key, and sharing it can really help everybody around the table and the PPT team.
And there are two critical sources of information. One is the parent and often the child's pediatrician or treating professionals who see your child over time. And so don't be shy in having that kind of conversation with especially if you have a developmental pediatrician. I also want to point out, again, on ct.gov, the State Department of Education website, for those that are either new to special education or want to become more familiar, there is a guide called the Parent's Guide to Special Education that is available on the State Department of Education website. These are not your procedural safeguards. It's sort of a booklet that's user-friendly. I believe it's in English and Spanish and possibly another language as well. And some school districts offer that as part of the procedural safeguards and other booklets. And if they don't, just get it on the state website and you can understand the process.
Oh, and just thinking about language, I think when we met with Brian, he did make it clear that the new IEP will be available in different languages as well, which is going to be extremely helpful too. I think up to 10, if my memory serves me right. Right,
it was 8 or 10 with the possibility of more down the road. It's just getting the website up and running with the existing input, and as they learn about the websites, its benefits, its detriments, there'll be refinements down the road. And again, that's where parents could be very critical in saying, I don't understand this document, or how do I get into that parent portal, or why is the data collection that used to be on the old IEP not on the new IEP? So there are changes. We don't know exactly what they will be. We have a good idea, and that's where this side-by-side comparison comes into play. But once we start getting into the working with that document, I'm sure there are going to be benefits and detriments, and multiple language being one of the benefits. And so I'm, ordinarily I'd say I'd be excited about the change, but nobody asked me my opinion about changing the IEP, except for the font size. That was my major complaint with the IEP task force, is the font size is too small. So I think we're coming to the close of our appointed hour, and try to get it to as many questions. I know we did not get to every single question, and I apologize, but we will have another webinar, our last one for the year, on June 15th, on Wednesday, June 15th at 7 p.m. We are going to have 3 individuals from private special ed schools: Jennifer Shirazi of Eagle Hill in Greenwich, Clay Kaufman, who's the director of the Cedar School, also in Greenwich, and Sue Ellen Inwood, who's the director of the Easton Country Day School in Easton, to discuss their unique approach to meeting the needs of children with special needs and their learning differences. I want to thank Jane and Jennifer for participating this evening and for all of those who have stayed with us throughout the evening. And there are quite a few that are still logged on. We do always get a question, can I get a recording of the webinar? It will be going out after tonight's meeting, I think, to YouTube. And somebody asked about closed captioning. The YouTube is closed caption. Unfortunately, we cannot get Zoom to help us with making this more accessible than it already is. So I have nothing further to say other than thank Jane and especially Jennifer for their participation. And so I'll leave it to Jane and Jennifer to offer their concluding remarks.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, Jennifer. I think it goes to show we didn't get through a lot of the questions that have been presented tonight. I think it'd be great to have you back again in the fall, Jennifer. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions with regard to the new IEP format, as well as questions from parents as they settle into another new school year going forward. So thank you for coming tonight. And just to remind everybody that to check out the JumpStar's Facebook and Instagram page. In addition to providing this educational resource, we also like to provide social opportunities too at no expense to the families and really build that sense of community so that people can come together and have fun and relax. I think we actually have an event this Thursday evening in Norwalk, so check out that information and I look forward to seeing everybody next month. So thank you, Jennifer, for coming along tonight and sharing with us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure talking about special education laws and practices and IEP information and everything with the two of you. And I would love to do it again in September. And I want to thank everybody for coming and for listening. And if anybody has questions that weren't answered, you can always give me a call or shoot me an email and I'm happy to address your questions.
Right, and our contact information is in the chat section. Please look at that. And last and most important, I want to thank my daughter, Rachel, because without Rachel, these webinars would not occur. She's our technical advisor, IT advisor, producer. You're in contact with her for registering, having questions answered, which we do encourage for the next, for each webinar. So send her the questions you have. We'll try to get them to them at the next webinar on June 15th at 7 p.m. So without further ado, I want to thank all who have participated, Jennifer and Jane as well. Stay safe and healthy, and we will see those who are here next month in June.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.